Contemporary craft fosters the use of traditional craft materials such as ceramic, fiber, glass, metal, and wood to make art. Our community honors the history and heritage of craft while showcasing modern exploratory work. On this season of Sounds from the Studio, host Sydney Leslie will be taking a look at contemporary craft's 50-year history through interviews with the directors, curators, and artists who helped us grow into the organization we are today. Welcome to Season 3 of Sounds from the Studio, Archive This. Find SCCPGH on Instagram and Facebook, and visit our website, contemporarycraft.org. Sounds from the Studio is available on all podcast platforms. We just ask that you please follow, rate, and review the podcast so more folks can find it.
In contemporary craft news, our new exhibition, Gay, The Beauty of Ephemeral and Eternal, opens on Friday, September 13th, and is on view through January 18th. This exhibition invites viewers to explore the captivating duality between the beauty of ikebana, traditional Japanese flower arrangement, and the eternal nature of well-crafted objects. 4 artists engaged with members of Sogetsu Ikebana Pittsburgh, sparking contemplation of time, materiality, and heritage. This dialogue illuminates profound connections in Japanese culture that are woven throughout these art forms, harmonizing impermanence and eternity in Japan's cultural tapestry, bridging past, present, and future. I hope you'll join us for the opening reception on Friday, September 13th from 5:30 to 8 p.m. Welcome to Sounds from the Studio. Today I'm excited to talk with Janet McCall, former Executive Director at Contemporary Craft. Welcome, Janet.
Thank you.
I'm so excited to be chatting with you today. You were the Executive Director for, I think, 25 or 26 years, beginning in 1995. And you just have so much knowledge of contemporary craft and the craft community as a whole. But I'll let you introduce yourself a little bit further. Would you tell us about yourself, your background, and how you came to contemporary craft?
Glad to. I moved to Pittsburgh right after college and had no job and no work experience. I had studied English and art history, and one thing that I knew, I wanted to work in the arts community, but without any experience, that was a bit of a challenge. Right. My mother is an artist, and what she had given to me and all of us kids was an understanding that art is central to life. And she really validated the fact that it would be fine to seek a career in the arts. I didn't have to think about making money. I mean, she said you have to be able to support yourself, but don't think about it beyond that. So I went to the Carnegie Museum, and I didn't qualify for anything. So I asked where the volunteer office was. I went to the volunteer director and got started volunteering on Saturdays, and that led to the first half of my career. I was there for I think 16 years altogether, and I initially just kind of started at the bottom and worked my way up. I left midpoint to go to graduate school, so I went to University of Pittsburgh, and I then got a master's degree in history of art. And from there, I was trying to kind of decide what my next step was. I knew I wanted to go back into community, and I had a short, brief job working for the Post-Gazette doing freelance art reviews.
Oh, wow.
And I was assigned to go to Contemporary Craft.
Got it.
And they were doing a renovation, and I was supposed to do a story about it. And at the end of the interview, the director said, by the way, I'm going to be leaving. Maybe you want to apply for my job.
Wow.
Yeah. And so that's what really led me to Contemporary Craft.
Wow. That's amazing. I had no idea, actually.
It was a little bit of destiny and synchronicity. I mean, I knew about Contemporary Craft because my boss at the Carnegie had sent me out to the original store in Verona when I was looking for a special gift. And so then I became like a regular visitor out there.
Yeah.
So when Linda Metropolis, who was the director who told me she was going to be leaving, mentioned it, I already had a connection to the place and to craft.
Yeah.
So
that's great. I'm wondering kind of where was contemporary craft in the Pittsburgh arts community at the time? Like, where did it stand compared to the Carnegie or other arts organizations?
Well, I think, we have always talked about ourselves as small but mighty.
Right.
However, in the early years, the thread of connection to Betty Raphael
Yeah.
was known by a few, but
Mhm.
not a lot of people. And I think the move from Verona into the Strip District in the produce terminal building,
Yeah.
although it was a busy, active urban neighborhood, we were a little bit lost in that building.
Right.
And we were not in the mainstream in terms of traffic.
Mhm.
So we people found us
Mhm.
and said, "Oh, what a treasure. This is a wonderful place." But they didn't necessarily know about us otherwise.
Yeah.
And so that was a real priority, was how are we going to engage more fully in the community?
Yeah.
How are we going to get the word out in terms of visibility? And I remember vividly my first day on the job, the Post-Gazette printed the list of RAD recipients for
Mhm.
funding grants for the year, and we were turned down, and I couldn't believe it.
Yeah.
So immediately we started a campaign to convince them to give us a second shot. We
Yeah.
went back to a follow-up hearing, but one of the board members, a lovely man who I knew from the Carnegie days, he sort of said to me, "Well, craft is weird."
Right.
And I have to think about the fact that now that's become a word out in popular culture again currently.
Right.
But so that was the challenge. Like, I knew, Kate Leiden, our assistant director, knew
Right.
that what we were doing was really high quality.
Mhm.
We were reflecting Betty Raphael's vision
Right.
of contemporary artists working with craft materials in new ways.
Yeah.
So we had a lot of confidence about the fact that people just had to find us
Right.
and get to know us and get over that
Yeah.
concern that we were fringy.
Yeah. So it sounds like you were still kind of fighting that notion that craft and like belong in the fine arts realm and stuff like that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Again, and we were small. It was a staff of 4 people.
Yeah.
And so when we would get people in the door and they would see the quality of the art, then they were won over pretty easily.
Right.
And we actually were ahead of the curve. A lot of times we would bring in major artists to
Mhm.
exhibit in Pittsburgh for the first time at Contemporary Craft,
Right.
rather than at the Carnegie or
Right.
some of the larger institutions. But even recruiting artists for exhibitions, sometimes there was resistance, not always,
Yeah.
but sometimes we would reach out and invite an artist to be in a show, and we would get a response back, "Well, I'm not a craft artist."
Right.
And so we'd say, go to our website,
Yeah.
look at the names of artists we show, and then you can let us know, do you want to be shown in our gallery?
Right.
And pretty quickly they came around.
Yeah. There was still that distinction.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
And the out-of-town visitors also got it right away. Like,
Yeah.
just this week, we were at the Alta Via dinner for
Right.
Contemporary Craft, and one of the guests used to live in San Francisco, and he said, "Oh, I found you guys years before I moved to Pittsburgh. I would fly into the city, and I would always go there and buy things and have them shipped back
Wow.
to
Yeah.
California."
That says a lot too.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
So that was, we thought, if we can find more people like that,
Yeah.
we were confident that we could build audience.
Yeah. I did want to ask you a question about working within the local Pittsburgh communities. I know, especially in the late 90s and early 2000s, I think this program started the year that you came to Contemporary Craft, but it was the Museum School Partnership,
Yes.
which was a program that brought craft artists to teach workshops at certain Pittsburgh public schools. Could you tell me a little bit more about that and what your experience was like?
Yes. That was actually the very first program I worked on
Mhm.
as executive director. And I arrived at the job and I was told that we had already received a small grant from the Grable Foundation
Mhm.
to start this museum school partnership. But generally, when there's a leadership turnover, the foundations, freeze the grants, and they
Right.
don't release because they want to see sort of how the new leader is going to
Right.
do
Right. Yeah.
with the organization. But we had a really strong commitment from
Mhm.
Val Westcott, who was the lead art teacher at the school
Okay.
where we went. We had a strong commitment from the principal there.
Mhm.
And
Was it just the one school?
it was just, initially it was one school,
Okay.
and then we expanded
Mhm.
to a couple others. So I went and met with the head of the Grable Foundation and, said we're really committed. And most of all, we had the lead commitment from Tina Brewer,
Right.
who was the first artist.
Yeah.
So we had a meeting. We talked about what their goals were. We convinced them to release the money so we could move forward.
Mm-hmm.
And so the first pilot occurred. And what it did for us, one of the things that we heard from funders, and I heard this also from the Regional Asset District,
Mm-hmm.
was, you're so small, you're behind the brick walls of that big produce terminal, but you're not visible in the community. What are you doing out in the community? And our education, the director's position had been eliminated for funding reasons.
Mm-hmm.
So we didn't have a strong education program, but we kind of felt like schools and education are the future of this organization.
Absolutely.
And audiences in general.
Mm-hmm.
So that was a big jump for us when the Grable Foundation said, okay, we're going to support this. We feel good about it.
Yeah.
And the engagement within the community where the school was located, parents would come every year.
Yeah.
And to the open house, they wanted to meet the artists. They had heard already about the program,
Mm-hmm.
or younger siblings had participated. It became like it had a huge following.
Yeah.
And this idea that we could work with the school and their curriculum requirements,
Mm-hmm.
but have the artists work as teams with the other subject teachers
Mm-hmm.
was really novel. Like,
Yeah.
we had math teachers and science teachers, language arts teachers saying, I've never partnered with an artist before.
Right.
But it was really the strong commitment of the school that made it work. And
Yeah.
Grable was extremely generous in funding the program because they could see also what the benefits were.
Yeah. What were some of the projects that kind of overlapped with the other subjects in the curriculum, if you remember?
So for each project, like Tina did, it was a frame, a quilted piece,
Mm-hmm.
and the theme was kind of family heritage and
Mm-hmm.
ancestry. And so the students researched the background of their culture, their families. In the science class, they learned about color theory and dyeing fabrics, as I recall.
Yeah.
In the math class, they learned about calculating the fabric and, all the work that they were going to have to do to end up with a good design.
Yeah.
So it was and for language arts, each student had to write at the end an essay about their piece.
Mm-hmm.
And Tina was amazing. She had every student take a turn in 6th grade to stand up and make their presentation to the class. And the kids learned a lot about one another's cultures and that they didn't know.
Yeah.
And, it was very, very strong interdisciplinary effort. And so, kudos to her. And she was just the recipient of a big award from the Heinz Endowments, and so well deserved. But,
absolutely.
She was so committed to that program from the get-go.
Yeah,
so,
that's huge. Yeah. So there was some really major growth of contemporary craft during your time here, including, but not at all limited to, a successful capital campaign, a major renovation that added studios, artist residencies, 2 additional exhibition series, which were the Raphael Founders Prize Transformation Series and the Social Justice Series. And then eventually the move to our current location in Lawrenceville, in the Lawrenceville neighborhood of Pittsburgh. I originally was going to cut this question, but with the addition of working studios in our Strip District location, how did that kind of change our capacity as an organization and working in like our education program?
Yeah, it was pretty dramatic. As I said, due to funding cuts, there wasn't any education staff, and all we had when I arrived was a small space that was a drop-in studio space, but it was essentially like a table and a couple of chairs next to the elevator, and it was in the hallway. So after we expanded, we took over the basement area, which was just storage, and outfitted 3 large studio spaces. And so we went from like 5% of the square footage of the building to education, devoted to education, to about 40%.
Wow.
So that was a huge jump. And then suddenly it meant we could bring in visiting artists. We could do more elaborate workshops. We could engage our visitors in understanding that art is not a passive only viewing activity,
Right.
but it's about also making. And
Right.
it was, a dramatic shift when that occurred.
Yeah.
Now, we still had to ramp up our budget to support
Right.
it. And I remember, that was a tough case to make.
Right.
We'd go in and talk to the funders, and we would say, we don't fit in the small arts group anymore. We can't get that funding.
Yeah.
Now we're a mid-sized group. And they would say, well, yes, but you haven't reached the $1 million operating threshold for the
Right.
larger groups. So it was, slow, moderate growth was always our mantra. So we
Right.
just kept steadily working on growing those programs.
Yeah. I could definitely see also that kind of taking contemporary craft from being, as you said earlier, someone said hidden between those walls, to kind of actually filling the space.
Yes.
Yeah.
And we began then to use the outside space as well. We would have raku workshops and fire out on the plaza. We really tried to enliven the outdoor as well, because we were still in a little bit of a fortress-like corner.
Right. Yeah.
And so that's actually why when we moved to Lawrenceville, we wanted to have huge glass windows so everyone driving or walking by would see what was happening and want to stop and come in.
Yeah.
So that was the challenge of that location, that these wonderful studios were there, but sometimes we would talk to people who would say, I visit every year, and I didn't know you had studios.
Right.
I've never, and we tried to address it with signs, but so it was a nice interim step, but then coming here really allowed that full blossoming that I see happening right here, which is so exciting.
Yeah, I love that. I wanted to ask you about starting our exhibition series that addresses subjects within social justice. So for those listening, for example, the series has included exhibitions about gun violence, mental health, and food justice. I'm wondering what kind of drove you to start this series when you did, and if that had been a goal of yours for a long time.
I have to say that it was a board member who really planted the seed for us, although I certainly had a very strong interest personally in social justice.
Right.
Dr. Rolf Lober and his wife Magda were active at the University of Pittsburgh, involved in a long-term study of young people and delinquency, and they were trying to understand the factors that caused this pattern to emerge in some young people and not others. And they were also art collectors. Dr. Lober is no longer alive, although his wife Magda is. But they just were so passionate about art, and they were big fans of this organization. They were donors. So Dr. Lober came and said to me and to Kate, have you ever thought about a show about violence?
Yeah.
And it's hard to roll your mind back in time. That was a very strange, like off the wall question at the time. And we kind of looked at one another and we said, no, and he said, well, I think it would make a wonderful exhibition, and I really encourage you to think about it, and I'd be glad to, be a resource. And so he left, and we started having this conversation, and we thought, gee, how would we do that?
Right.
Would people be turned off by it? Would it be supported by funders? Like, we really grappled with it. But the more we talked about it, there's actually I'm a big fan of Carl Jung, and there's a term that he uses, which is circumambulate. You circle round and round a subject, and you get deeper and you have better understanding. And the more we talked, we thought, well, maybe it would work. Maybe it would make sense. And my personal connection is that my father was removed from the state, removed by the state of Ohio from his family when he was an infant. And there were very difficult circumstances, domestic abuse and substance abuse and poverty and hunger. And so I was aware, although we didn't know a lot about the story, I was always sensitized to that. And so there was something about moving into this social justice arena that felt very good to me, to use artists' work to showcase some of these problems
Mhm.
and engage the community more. And it also allowed us to cast a much wider net in terms of the artists that we were showcasing.
Yeah.
With each show, we tried to include some local artists so we could use them to do residencies with the local community. But we also were looking for national and international artists.
Mhm.
And we were looking for lived experience, so people who had struggled with these things. And, one show just kind of led to the next. But Enough Violence is the first show was so well received.
Yeah.
And what we heard from the community, and we worked with many partners in the community,
Mhm.
agencies who were addressing the same problems, but this was a chance for them to approach it through the lens of art.
Yeah.
And they were thrilled to support us. And it also led to, because we were looking for artists who had lived experience, for example, with violence, we put out a call for artists with each show, which we hadn't done before either. And so just casting that wider net, some of the work that came in was so powerful. Some of the artists that we had no idea were working in this arena. And the artist said to us, I make this work, but it's considered difficult by some people. And so I don't have a chance to exhibit it very much.
Right.
So I would be thrilled to be in the show. So by the time that first show ended, we were already realizing this could be something that could become a series. And there were funders out there who were funding really just basic safety net needs, who were very interested in supporting the exhibitions, even though they typically didn't support art because of the audiences we were addressing.
Yeah.
And, access to art is especially important when people are living with those kinds of challenges.
Absolutely.
So, we talked among staff meetings. I mean, I think it really changed the staff. What should be the next show? How might we move forward? And so we next focused on mental illness and just kind of, continued on from there.
Yeah. I know that the first show, Enough Violence, I think opened in the fall of 2013.
Mhm.
Was that kind of drastically different from what other arts organizations were doing? Just as you said, because it's a difficult subject to approach within exhibitions?
Yes, absolutely. It was quite different at the time, and the again, there was kind of a mixed response at the beginning. We
Yeah.
did put warning signs for on the front doors for each exhibition. We
Yeah.
wanted people to know. What they might encounter in terms of some of the very powerful work, but these were not pieces that were sensational.
Right.
These were pieces that were made in response to how violence impacts us as humans. And the intention was healing as well as just sharing stories. And I remember a group of women came in from a domestic violence program. They brought the entire group of residents. They spent hours in that show. I mean, they just couldn't get enough of it. And it was like with all of these shows, they were saying, this is my story. I don't feel so alone. This is wonderful. And they actually came up to the desk before they left that day. And a couple of the women wanted to leave their contact information. And they said, if other women come through the show and they're struggling with domestic violence, we would be willing to talk to them or help them in some way.
Yeah.
So as we began to get these kinds of very moving responses, we realized, well, I think we can balance out some of the concerns about these topics.
Yeah.
And they just started to unlock and open conversations as well. I mean, when we did the next show, Mindful, which was about mental health, I found that people would walk in the door and look at a piece and suddenly they would begin sharing something about a person in their life, themselves, a family member, a friend who struggled with mental illness. And we were trying to reduce the stigma and provide support. And it was like they were sharing their story perhaps for the first time. I mean,
Yeah.
I remember going through the show with people I'd known for years, and they told me a story about a family member, and I'd had no idea. So it was, it was very moving. So some of the individual donors were maybe resistant at 1st because, I mean, we had one major donor who liked bringing his corporate friends in and making a pitch for them to support us. But as he said to me, well, I can't take them through
It makes
this
it a little
show.
harder.
Yeah,
right?
he said they want to look at beautiful art. They don't want to deal with this. But the great thing was that by the end of the run of the show, and especially as we began doing a lot of programming related to this, including opportunities for the board members to tour and learn more about the content, suddenly the same people who said, I can't bring my friends through, were bringing, their colleagues through.
Absolutely.
And you could hear them talking about, why the show is important. And so that was pretty great.
Yeah, I think that's really the beautiful thing about working in art too, that even something difficult, having it in an art space kind of allows people to open up. It reaches a different level of them.
It really does. And because for every show we had hands-on opportunities, for some people, especially if they had past traumatic experience, you can't put into words some of this, but you can, by making something, putting your hands into the material, you can process and release or express what you need to express, and no words are really required. I remember we had one wall installation with these beautiful birds in flight that was very calming. And sometimes I'd look over and notice that a visitor was just sitting there quietly for a very long time, just like being soothed or supported by it. And one woman told me that she had lost a family member and she was grieving, and she thought, she had just gotten the news, she thought, where will I go? And she came to Contemporary Craft and sat there to process what she was feeling. So
that's incredible. That could do something for someone. I'm wondering, over kind of your 26 years here, what was the most memorable exhibition or program for you while you were here?
So hard.
I'm sure there are a lot.
Can't pick your favorite.
I know.
But I will say, I mean, it's enriched my life beyond belief. That, anyone who has a chance to live with this kind of art. But so there are 3 shows that I'll mention. And interestingly, they're all shows that at the time were considered to be sort of non-mainstream, and these are all these were solo shows by artists of color, and they were very powerful. So I have to rank number 1, the Nick Cave exhibition with these powerful bodysuits and masks. And the show was laid out almost like in a kind of a dramatic runway fashion, stretching across the gallery. And he talked about, as a Black man, that he had begun making these sound suits because after the Rodney King incident, he didn't feel safe going out as a Black man. And so he began creating these sound suits to wear. And he then also was using them for performances and dance. And so, it was just a spectacular show. And then the 2 others, Mr. Imagination, a self-taught artist who didn't have 2 quarters to rub together, but he was robbed and shot. And when he came to, he said, I'm going to make art with the rest of my life.
His story is incredible.
And he was just so filled with joy. And his installation was very cool as well. Rich red walls and thrones and crowns, and but just also like the sweetest human being. Like he stayed at my house while he was in town, and it was just like I would wake up in the morning and he had gone out and he had found some little wood scraps that were sitting waiting to be taken away by waste management, and he gathered them up, and he had gone down to the little shop and made a sculpture and gave it to us.
Classic maker.
Yeah. So, and the third is Zenobia Bailey, and
Yes.
she made these crocheted mandalas. Also, she wanted to come and do the installation with us, and she had a very different approach to it. So all of these artists, it was a chance for us to sort of let go of our notions of how maybe we would install the show and find out like what they were doing. And so it was amazing when those crocheted mandalas started going up on the wall, and all of these artists became top, so well known in the field, and we were very proud that we showed them here at Contemporary Craft.
I'll also say that we're very lucky to have both Zenobia Bailey and a Mr. Imagination piece in the permanent collection.
Nice.
Yeah.
That's
we're very
wonderful.
lucky. Yeah. One of my last questions is obviously over your 25 years here, you oversaw and mentored all of the staff, many of which have gone on to lead other arts organizations and program teams. Do you have any advice to people in the arts administration field that are doing this work to promote and support artists?
I think the women and I really want to give a shout out. Stephanie Garrison, along with who was in my CMU class, but didn't work with us directly at Contemporary Craft, but among those young arts leaders, and Natalie Sweet. And here now Yusong Cheng was also a former student and now assistant director. And of course, Rachel, our current executive director, who we were lucky to have her working earlier in her career here. So I think what I try to say to young people is kind of what I saw from all of them, like get your foot in the door, show that you're really dedicated to the arts. Work hard. You have to kind of prove yourself. You have to find someone who's going to take you on as a champion. And then they're going to write the first reference letter and move you on to the next person. The other thing that I saw all of those 4 young women do was they had early chances while they were pretty young to join arts boards.
Okay.
And they were smaller arts organizations, but they got right into the thick of it. And so suddenly they began to understand the much bigger picture of an organization as opposed to just the single job that they were doing. And so I think that made a huge difference for all of them. Like I could see the difference in terms of what they were bringing back from their volunteer experiences on those boards that, we were benefiting from as an organization as well. So in general, I know it's so hard to get started. And I was just talking to a young woman this week who's kind of discouraged. And I said, it takes a lot of persistence, and you have to do some kind of yucky jobs at the beginning.
Absolutely,
you can't start out with stars in your eyes. I mean, my first actual job where I was on the payroll at the Carnegie was they needed someone to work in the controller's office. And if I had told you, what's the worst possible job that I would have to take, it would have been that, that's never been my bailiwick. But they were willing to hire me. And really, I literally sat with an adding machine and a calculator all day, totaling up bills from the Xerox departments. But they gave me a job, and I kind of learned a lot more about that side of the organization. And in general, I would say, well-rounded exposure to each area, to education, to fundraising over time, so that you really become a very attractive whole candidate. But I really have to say I'm in awe with what I see happening right now with all the young leaders, the ones that I mentioned, and so many others in Pittsburgh. It's really gratifying to see how, you are all pushing beyond what we were trying to do, and it's very impressive.
Yeah, I was going to say, most people I know that work in the arts kind of got into it they've worked every single job in the
Yes,
arts, and
that's
that
the
is kind of
key.
what you have to do. You just say yes,
Exactly.
Yeah.
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 Always say
Yeah,
yes.
absolutely. But it does. It gives you so much knowledge of everything that's going on.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's the best thing you
And
could
don't
do.
make a snap judgment, because
Yeah.
it really could lead you, to something next that you don't know about.
Absolutely. Yeah. Okay, my last question, which is a very fun one. Can you tell us 3 songs that describe you and your work?
So let's see. I would say John Lennon's Imagine.
Okay.
I think the spirit of that song, what he was striving for in a world where, we're living together peacefully and in love, I think
Mhm.
that really embodies, the social justice focus, and, what most of us in the arts, I think, are really striving for
Yeah.
too through our work. The second one would be from the Willy Wonka factory,
Uh-huh.
Pure Imagination. Come
Good
with
pick.
me,
Yeah.
and it's just like that. Again, that's the beauty of places like this,
Yeah.
that you can have those opportunities that change you in some
Mhm.
ways. So the third one is probably not very well known, but it's kind of like a folk song. It's Swimming in the Great Big Dipper. I don't know if you've
Okay.
ever
I've
heard
never
of
heard
it.
of it.
Emma's Revolution. I go to the Unitarian Church, and it's one of the songs that we kind of responded to, a group of us there, because it's like we're all the same. We're all human.
Mhm.
Some people in power, and some people with none. Some people, suffering and pain. Some people in joy. But we're all the same, and we're all here together,
Mhm.
on this planet. So yeah, I'll send you a link to the song
Please
if
do.
you're not
Yeah.
familiar. It's
I'd love
just
to
a
listen.
wonderful spirit of community,
Yeah.
how we can help one another.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Those are
So,
very good picks,
so
Janet.
thank you.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for coming today. This conversation has been great. We usually give everybody a chance to kind of shout out. I don't know if you have social media that you want to share, or any projects that you're working on that you want to promote.
I'm kind of mostly off of social media, I
Okay,
have to
good
say,
for
which
you.
is a beautiful thing in
Yeah.
retirement. But I am working on a book.
Okay,
So that's my current
that's very
project. It
exciting.
was actually my top priority when I retired, and
Uh-huh.
I'm almost done with the first draft. I mean, I
Yeah.
still have more to go, but it's actually the story of my father's birth family, and
Okay.
specifically his mother and what she went through. And so it's kind of my search for the grandmother that I never met, and
Wow.
also trying to find justice for her
Yeah.
and kind of put her back in the family. So it's been quite a compelling project to work on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. That's so interesting. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
so exciting. We'll have to promote that whenever
Oh,
you
thank
get
you.
the chance.
Thank you.
On the next episode of Sounds from the Studio, we'll be talking with Kate Lyden. Kate served as exhibitions director at Contemporary Craft for more than 30 years, curating innovative exhibitions and featuring up and coming artists who are today some of the biggest names in contemporary art.
Sounds from the Studio is produced by Rugged Angel Productions for Contemporary Craft. Please subscribe to and rate the show wherever you get your podcasts. And don't forget to share. Thanks for listening.